All right, assignment 9 is our digital painting project. And digital painting starts very similarly to digital coloring. So here the lemon is digital coloring, where we sketched, but then we refined a beautiful black vector outline. And then we colored behind the outline, and then we split that color into duotones, and we could use it hard edge or cut edge, or soft and gradated. We could add full spectrum color, but still behind the outline. And if we wanted to, we could color the outline with color holds, replace the outline with the color, but you can see that outline is still there. So digital coloring is whenever you color behind a real or implied outline. Digital painting, on the other hand, which is everything outside of this little rectangle, is when you might start with a sketch. Either it's a painted sketch or a drawn sketch, but very quickly any kind of outlines or line work gets overtaken by paint strokes, right? And digital painting has no kind of flat color to it because all the edges are very transitional. Even if you start blocking with local flat color, by the end, everything gets kind of softly graded because there's no outlines defining everything, like on the edges of this kiwi or on the skin of this apple or in the colors of this man's face. So last semester I did James Joyce, an author I like, and I showed how we could do him in very different approaches, right? But it's a fairly realistic portrait here, representational, even though I played with some funky colors. But in the spirit of caricature, you could also make it a more abstract, stylized version, even to the point I wanted to play with watercolor textures and marker textures in digital painting, which you can see in all the videos of the YouTube channel from before. And so I even came up with a non-representational version where if you just saw this, you wouldn't know it was a person's face at all. But it's fun textures and colors. And then you can, of course, composite different approaches together. Or we can just go with straight realism for digital painting, just trying to make it look as believable to the eye as possible, so a representational style. But how does it start? Well, you have to choose your reference. So this is going to be the reference I use. I'm going to be doing 4 caricatures in a portrait, but it doesn't mean I'm going to show them exactly like this. For one, because I'm doing a painting, not a composite, I am not a slave to the photo reference, so I can move them closer together. I mostly want to do their faces, not so much their bodies, so I'll do a landscape format caricature that kind of shoves all their faces in towards the middle. And I'm going to play with their faces and their coloring a little bit. But in order to play with facial anatomy, you first have to kind of understand it. So what we take from the photo reference are clues to things that we can play with. Even if we're going for a representational portrait, there might be certain things that we want to exaggerate or caricature. And they can go in all different directions. As you can see this, I grabbed these from a caricature blog. So here's the author of the blog, and this is his own caricature of himself, and you can see how that's a very different take than other people went with him. And if I was asked to do a caricature of him, I would probably elongate his face as well, as these 3 did. But he chose to go the opposite way with himself and just made his nose a lot more prominent. So there's really no wrong way to do it as long as it comes from your own sincere interest. But these are all nice examples of digital paintings. You'll notice how there's no outlines containing anything, even though they'll all start with drawings. So how do we get started? Well, we have to look at what real faces and how they are structured, right? And it doesn't matter if it's a cartoonish face that looks human or a sketch of a very particular human face. You're going to find that they follow what's called a realistic facial template. And if we find that realistic facial template and we understand it, then we can apply it to shapes that aren't so realistic, that are exaggerated. And that's what I'm going to do. Or we can use them just to make a better realistic portrait. And then once you kind of understand how those unrealistic shapes can use the realistic template, you can get likeness even across a whole bunch of variant shapes. So, I guess I'll put these both up because they're very different, right? A stencil from Archer, a flash animation, and a sketch drawing. And I'm going to show you what these have in common by just drawing on top of this template. So I'm going to teach you realistic facial anatomy here very quickly. And it'll help you know what kind of photo reference to look for. Basically, this is what you need to do from your photo reference. You need to be able to recognize all these different micro measurements, because these all have to do with likeness. Especially important to me is the space between the bottom of the nose and the upper lip, right? And the space between the lower lip and the chin. And then the space of the eyes on the outside of the eye, in between the eyes, from here to there. All of these measurements matter to actually attaining likeness. And it takes a lot of practice. So I just want you to kind of play with it and have fun. But it all starts with this template. All right, so what do we have? Well, we have a basic egg-shaped head. That doesn't mean that all heads are generic like this, but that's what our skulls are basically doing underneath. So on top of that, I'm going to build up. It drew a line straight down the middle of the face because, for the most part, faces are bisymmetrical. They match fairly well side to side. If they don't, that's a big point of caricature you want to play up, right? So you see how he matches pretty well side to side. The next most obvious is that the eye line goes from the top of the cranium to the bottom of the chin, and that's halfway down. So this line right here is the eye line. So what does that mean? This is very low res, which is good. All right. Let's be really simple. So our eye line here means that our eyes have to space across this span. And if you're going realistically, you do 5 equal spaces. So what I try to do is do what I think is a realistic eye width in the middle of the head. That's 1 space. And then I'll extend that over twice on both sides, until you get, and you adjust it until you get 5 equal spaces. So I'm going to make it a little bit wider in the middle for this jaw shape, and I basically want 5 equal spaces. Now this is for realistic proportions. So that's what every human skull looks like. You might decide for other reasons later to exaggerate the eye size, but we'll get to that. But when you exaggerate the eye size, you also have to exaggerate the structure around the eye. The next measurement, as we can see here, is from the eye down to the chin. If you split that, you get the nose line and the mouth line and the chin line. And this is the way it usually works. On children, it's slightly different, but this is a more generic template. So for this whole distance, from the eye line, which is in the middle, to the bottom of the chin, halfway is the bottom of the nose. So that's roughly halfway. So this is 1/2, 1/4 of the overall head. This is 1/2 up here. And this is the bottom quarter, but you're going to split this into thirds. And you carry those lines over. And then this line will be what I call the mouth line. It's the separation between the upper and lower lip, right there. And this is what I call the chin line. And it's where a massive fat at the bottom of your chin tacks back to the skull, this little shadow. Okay, so thirds there. Now, there are different ways that people use to get the width of the mouth. The most common portrait way is to go from the center of the pupil straight down to get the width of the mouth. But there's a better way that I like, where you put, and I'll do this in a different color, just so you can remember it. If you put a dot right in the middle of the head, and then you put a dot on the nose line, which remember is halfway down to the chin, you draw a line straight down from your eye lines to make a little rectangle. That's where the nose will occur. And then you put another dot. You have the dot here, and then a dot at these two corners. And then you simply draw straight lines through those dots and continue them all the way to the bottom of the chin. Okay, that will give you the width of the mouth when relaxed, without any facial muscles tugging at it. Now, what about the top of the head? Well, we're going to split that into thirds. And this gives us a nice general hairline where hair starts coming out of the cranium. And the brow. Not the bow, the brow. And the brow line is right here, and it's where we carry a lot of tension in our foreheads. It's always going to be where a crease develops in older people, especially in males. And it's a good place to see kind of the edge of expression. That's about the highest the eyebrows can ever reach, because the brow is a muscle that bulges out there. And then the hairline, you can see right there, a nice generic hairline. So let's draw in using this template. What can we make of it? Well, if I know the eye fits here, that means the whites of the eye extend from that point to that point. But the actual eyelid and the shadows around the eye can go beyond it. And if I know the nose takes place within this rectangle, if it's an upturned nose, a downturned nose, doesn't matter. It's going to fit this template. Now the other eye takes place in here. I know the mouth is this long, but it doesn't mean it's a straight line. It's usually slightly bowed, and it has an upper lip above it and a lower lip, sometimes big, sometimes thin, underneath it. And then the ears, which are not bone, they're cartilage. But unless you're older than about 40, your ears are going to fit nicely between the eye line and the nose line. Because they're cartilage, they grow throughout your life. So if I was drawing someone who was in their 90s, I would go higher than the eye line and lower than the nose line. And that would be a signifier of their age. The eyes would also be deeper set because the cartilage in the nose keeps growing throughout your life as well. And so the nose comes out a lot further in older portraits. All right. And then for the brow, well, I can just indicate it. That's kind of a point of tension, but maybe my eyebrows would be in a generic pose about halfway between the eye line and the brow line. And they match the curve at the top of the eye. And then the hairline, lots of people have different hairlines. Mine is a widow's peak, which looks kind of like this. And then comes down to the front of the ear. So I'll just base it on my own. We know our own faces better than most. And then the hair itself extends up usually above the cranium, right? Unless you're a skinhead or you have very, very closely cropped hair, your hair is going to extend beyond that egg shape. And then the last thing to make this less generic looking is to actually paint in or draw in a jawline, right? So the template got me here, but now I would fill in my own jawline, and it could have a squared off jaw, that's more angular, or one that's more pointed and narrow, or even one that has a lot of fatty deposit on it that bows down a little bit and maybe even has like a little bit of a butt chin. Those are all supported by the same template.